This is the third version of a Christmas star I first made about 15 years ago for display on my elevated deck that overlooks a suburban street. The 8-point design is less common, and it gets positive comments from neighbors. Weather damage and new light technology motivated this version. The multicolor LED technology that lights it is pretty amazing. The wireless controller enables a full range of static colors and multiple dynamic effects, including following the beat of music. And it's cheap, about $20 for 50 feet, just the right length to outline the points. The star spans a little over 8 feet. It does fit through typical internal doorways, but it may be difficult to store between seasons. Since it weighs only a few pounds, hanging flat against the ceiling in a garage is one possibility. To simplify storage, the star can be built to be disassembled, but it takes a little more effort and it takes a few minutes to assemble and disassemble each season. The total material costs less than $100 and only common shop tools are needed to build it. The other parts are two 13-inch aluminum pizza pans, 13 4-foot lengths of 5/16-inch fiberglass rods typically used to mark snowplow paths, 13 carriage bolts, number 10 by 20 and 3/4 of an inch long, with matching hex nuts or wing nuts. I found hex nuts with a nut driver easiest to use. 26 fender washers, 1 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch, and a lot of hot glue and duct tape. All material can be ordered online or found at local stores. Construction begins by drilling 13 1/4 inch holes in each pizza pan. A PDF of the drilling template can be downloaded. Go to the description of this video to get the link for download. Print 2 copies of the templates. Tape together and trim the perimeter with the scissors so that it fits inside the pan. Unfortunately, printers may not replicate dimensions accurately, so measure after printing and correct the hole locations if necessary. Alternatively, draw the template using dimensions shown in this picture. Use the template to find the center of each pan and mark using a center punch. Drill a 1/4 inch hole in the center of each pan. Deburr the holes using 200 grit sandpaper by hand or use a power sander. Tape the template to one of the pans and mark each of the other holes using a center punch. Place this pan on the second pan so both bottoms are touching. Use a bolt through the center holes to hold the 2 pans together. The carriage bolt has a square section at the head that will just fit inside the 1/4 inch hole. Align the pans so the square section is in both holes, then tighten the nut to securely hold the pans together. Use a scrap piece of wood under the bottom pan to backstop the drill and prevent the pans from separating while drilling. Use a second bolt through the first of the second holes to ensure the pans stay locked together as the 11 other holes are drilled. Mark the edge of each pan so they can be properly aligned when assembling. After all holes are drilled, deburr the holes. Fender washers are used on the bottom side of each pan for each hole. This keeps the pan from deforming when the bolts are tightened. Hot glue is used to hold the washers in place. A tapered center punch can be used to align the washers with the hole while the glue sets. Hot glue applied to the undersides of the bolt heads hold them in place, making assembly and disassembly easier. The hot glue may set up before the washer or bolt is in the correct position. A heat gun can be used to remount the glue to correct the position or smooth the coverage. Assemble the 2 pans top to top by aligning the edge marks and all 13 bolts to the 13 holes. If a bolt does not align, soften the hot glue and reposition. Next, build the star points. This requires cutting fiberglass rods. Beware of fiberglass splinters and dust when cutting. Search the internet for the hazards. I used gloves and a mask for personal protection and a shop vac to collect the dust. To prevent splintering the surface, use a small tubing cutter to scribe a cut line around the rod and then hacksaw the cut through. Otherwise, cut all around the circumference with the saw before cutting through the middle. Use 200 grit sandpaper to smooth the edges. From a 4-foot rod, cut 4 pieces exactly 5 inches long for the bases of the long points, and 4 pieces exactly 2.5 inches long for the bases of the short points. Also cut 4 of the 4-foot pieces exactly in half for the sides of the short points. Measure out a template on the work surface to make assembly easier and more accurate. Use weights to hold the sides in place while the corners are tack glued into position. Put a piece of tape under a corner. Cover the tape and insides of the rod with a thick coat of glue. Place a second piece of tape on top and fold around the rods and smooth. Push the tape into the hot glue and trim the excess tape. Add additional hot glue to fill any space between the tape and rods. Join the rods at the tip point with a long bead of hot glue. Wrap a single piece of tape around both rods and trim. I painted the points white to improve daylight appearance, but this is not necessary. It just made the assembly look a little neater. The next step is to assemble the star. Place the pan with the bolts at the center of the assembly space. Add a paper label to the base of each point. Place the 4 long points so their corners are against the 4 bolts near the center of the pan. Each bolt should contact 2 corners. Hold these points in position by placing a fender washer and nut on each of these bolts. Number each point on its label and its corresponding location on the pan. Check the alignment of opposite points using a string connected to their tips. The string should pass over the center bolt. If necessary, slightly loosen the nut over the corner that needs to be moved away from the bolt. Adjust the point so the string passes over the center. Then retighten the nut. Repeat this process to align the opposite tips. Use a square to check that these points are perpendicular to the other pair. It may be necessary to make several adjustments, or if you're lucky, none at all. Place each short point between long points so that the corners touch a long point side and the corresponding outside bolt. Use a pair of nuts with 1/4 inch washers to hold each short point in place. Write the numbers of the adjacent long points on the label of the short point. Place the other pan on top of this assembly so the edge marks are aligned. The star points keep the pans apart so that the nuts cannot be put on the bolts. Press on the center of the pan to deform it enough so that a nut can be put on the center bolt. Tighten this nut so that the pan edges press against the rods of the points. Make a final check of the alignment of the points and correct if necessary. The points can still be moved, but it takes a lot of force. Make relief cuts through the edges of the pans on both sides of each rod. Use a reciprocating saw with a metal blade to make these cuts. A hacksaw can be used if an electric saw is not available. Use the rods as a guide to saw through the edges to the beginning of the flat part of the pans. These cuts make it possible to force the rims together. If you do not want to be able to take the star apart for storage, then skip the next steps. Remove the top pan, all of the 12 nuts and washers, and remove the points. Tape a 1 inch by 2 inch triple layer of aluminum foil over each slot where a rod passes through the rims. This prevents the hot glue from sticking to the rods. Shape the foil around a scrap piece of rod. Do this for all 32 slots. Reassemble the star and verify all the points are in alignment, then tighten all of the nuts. For both types of stars, do the following steps. For each of the 16 tabs on each pan, use a hammer to flatten the tab and shape its end around the rod. Lift the tab and force hot glue around the rod for about 1 inch. Use a screwdriver or stick to force the tab down and smooth the hot glue along the edges of the tab. Use a wet towel to cool the tab and speed the setup of the glue. Repeat for each tab. Turn the star over and repeat for the 16 tabs on the bottom pan. For a star that can be disassembled, take it apart and remove all the loose aluminum foil from the pans, then reassemble. The final step is to fasten the lights to the star. The lights I used have 2 25-foot lengths of plastic strips around multicolor LEDs mounted on flexible printed circuits. Temporarily lay out the lights on 4 adjacent points to verify proper placement. Clamp or tack tape the strip to the rods at the rim and at the tip. Start with the end opposite the connector to the power supply. Clamp the strip so that the second LED is just outside the pan edge and there is 1 LED over the pan. Lay the strip so there is an LED over or just beyond the tip and clamp. Lay the strip back to the rim on the adjacent rod and clamp at the rim. Adjust the strips and clamps so that there is an LED at the tip, that the pairs of LEDs on the 2 rods are opposite each other, and that the strips are taut. At the center, fold the strip so there are 3 LEDs inside the rim with an LED at the fold. Repeat this process for the next 3 points in sequence. There should be 4 or 5 LEDs left inside the rim after all 4 points are placed. Power up the LEDs to make it easier to verify the placement. When satisfied, permanently tape the strips to the point rods. Wrap PVC or electrical tape around the strip and rod. I used white tape to match the white paint. Tape between every other LED and at the rim and the tip. For the LEDs where the strip changes direction, use a double fold so the LED at the bend can be taped to be parallel to the other LEDs. For the fold at the tip, tape the fold to the rods. The double fold over the pan is a little more difficult. Use a pair of clamps to hold the folds while a first layer of tape is applied. Remove the clamps and tape all around the LED. Continue the tape between the strips to keep them separated to form a V shape. Repeat the previous steps using the other LED strip to light the last 4 points. Tape together the 2 strips at the ends with the connectors. Tape the strips so that a 3 LED V fold is formed over the rim that looks like the other 7. Tape over the extra LEDs so they cannot be seen. Route the connectors away from the center and connect to the controller. The LED Vs need to lay flat, parallel to the pan. For a fixed star, they can be hot glued or taped to the pan. For the version that can be disassembled, tie strings looped through the opposite Vs. To disassemble, remove the strings, the 13 nuts, and the top pan. The 8 points can be removed and the LED strips folded to make a stack of points. Use a pair of rubber bands and a plastic bag to hold the points and wires together for storage. I used a 4-inch length of 2-inch PVC pipe to make a mounting bracket that fits my deck railing. I made one cut through the side of the pipe and used a hot air gun to soften the plastic so one half could be flattened. I used a couple of bolts to fasten the bracket to the back pan, positioned so the railing will be centered on the star. I taped the bottom of a sandwich bag to the back pan to hold and protect the controller, power supply, and extension cord from the weather. I can then just slip the bracket over the railing. I also tie 3 of the long points to the railing so winds can't move the star. Since the star is light and has a small cross-section to the wind, it can easily be attached to the side or roof of your home or mounted on a tree. If you build one, I hope you and the people that pass by enjoy it. Happy holidays!